are. Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you today, Erin, about data and justice work. You've been working with Freedom Lifted now for what, like 3 years?
Yeah, more than two. I think we're coming up on three.
Yeah, and it's really, you came on almost as soon as we pivoted during COVID, when the pandemic first hit, from doing mostly civil rights tours and in-person trainings to taking our trainings and putting them online. And I knew from the beginning I wanted to obviously collect feedback from people about how they were experiencing the training, what impact it was having on their work. But it wasn't just for me. I wanted to be able to show it to them as well. And I know, I take data seriously, and what it can teach us, but and also feedback. So it's both just like, what is happening? Well, how do we see what's happening? And how do we know what's good, and what's working? And so you were the first person I thought of when I was like, I want some help. I want someone to really, pay attention to this part of the work we're doing, especially since it's new for us to be using technology to do justice and equity, education work. So yeah, so you've been there, I feel like, from the beginning of our new life, and I'm happy about it. So today we're going to talk a little bit, because I have so much respect for you and how you approach your work, which is very, like, what is it, right? It's right brained, right? They say, or
Oh yeah, I don't even remember,
I
but
don't
yeah,
know.
one side of the brain.
Yeah, it's math and it's stats and it's, it's that you approach that through such a clear justice lens. And I always feel like people should hear from Erin about what it means to apply this kind of thinking and the skills that you have to justice work. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay.
Great.
So first, tell us a little bit about yourself. And, I love to start with this question that Ella Baker would always have for people is, who are your people? So.
Yeah, I love that question. Yeah, I usually tell the arc of my life and my story, and it always starts in Detroit because that's where I was born and raised, and went to a school in the city and then a high school in the suburbs, which really like shaped my view of the world and my racialization and my racial identity. And then went to Kalamazoo College where we met and started working at the Arca Center for Social Justice Leadership and taking classes at K College, and everything sort of like clicked into place about like, oh, this is why I had those like interesting life experiences earlier. I think the world just made a lot more sense through the lens of justice and oppression in a way that like just made my life more clear and made a lot more sense. And so I think my people, so after college, I came back home to Detroit, and that was something that I almost immediately knew that I wanted to do. I got very homesick. Not necessarily for like my immediate family, though I love them and I love living close to them, but for the like sense of place and the sense of belonging and like feeling like I know where my feet are and where my home is, and like just knowing the like stories of a place and knowing like, oh yeah, that's the street corner where, such and such happened, or like that's where we did somebody's birthday party 3 years ago, like just knowing the like nuance of place. And so I think that like my people at its core are like Detroiters, and the people that I keep coming back to and want to stay here for the rest of my life, and sort of like who I feel most accountable to are Detroiters. And it shaped so much of my life. And then within that, I mean, I think there's definitely aspects of like white Detroiters and white people and a lot of like other identities that I like pull in, that I feel very like responsible to those communities and like close with the missions and the values of like white anti-racists. And so I think that's like another community and another like people I'm a part of. But yeah, I think if I had to sort of like start from a place and like ground in a place, it would be Detroit.
I always love hearing you talk about Detroit, and I very much associate you with Detroit because of that. And, I said earlier that you started with Freedom Lifted almost 3 years ago, but yeah, we've known each other now, I guess, for 10.
That's wild. I think that's right.
When did you start at K?
2015.
Okay, so
Not quite 10.
8 years, yeah, so
Uh-huh.
8 years. But yes, as you were a wee freshman,
I know.
first year student, first year student.
Yeah.
So yeah, so and from the first day you came in during orientation and I met your parents and you were from Detroit and and that just was weaved in through so much of your outlook, even being then in Southwest Michigan. So I love hearing you talk about it. And I get a little jealous too because I didn't grow up in one place.
Mhm.
And when I was an adult, I'm an adult now, I claim Alabama as my home because that's my parents' home. And I did live there for a while, but we moved around a lot. And so I really depended on my family's connection, my extended family's connection to a place to claim a place
Mhm.
versus actually having like a hometown or a home space. So
Mhm.
I think it's really special and you're very fortunate to be able to have, you know, such a vibrant and, gosh, like talk about the history of the US is the history of Detroit, right? Like,
Mhm.
and a lot of people say the future of the US is Detroit can tell us what the future is too. So, yeah, to have such a vibrant place to call home, pretty cool.
Mhm. Yeah, and to like, I think I do feel very lucky to feel that legacy. I was doing some like family research, and I think we're coming up on 100 years in the city between me and my dad and my grandma, and like going back as far as like my grandma's parents were the ones who moved to Detroit. And so yeah, it feels very like significant to me to be like coming up on that 100-year anniversary and figure out what it means to sort of like celebrate that and honor that and give some energy to that.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's incredible. And yeah. Well, we can talk a bunch about that, about like, on the land, and whose land, right? And I
Mhm.
know that you think about that a lot, and your family is very conscious of that as well. So yeah, but I guess that's another interview. We're going to talk about data and justice. So, tell me a little bit more about your work that you do in the world in general. Sometimes we get paid for our work and our life's work, and sometimes, we don't necessarily get paid in money anyway, right? You get um, a lot of other value from it. But what are you doing right now?
Mhm.
And what is some of the most interesting work you've done in the justice space?
Mhm. Yeah, so I am currently a full-time data analyst and visualization specialist, which we were just joking the other day. Nobody really knows what that means, but I take numbers and I make them look nice and make them tell a story and help people make strategic decisions with the numbers that we have. And I do that at United Way, which is a big nonprofit in Detroit, and there's a national network of United Ways. Um, but I'm very lucky to have this consulting job with Freedom Lifted and a couple other people to be able to look at smaller scale, mostly like survey data and make sense of those and figure out where's the valuable feedback in that, and really understand like the experience of participants, especially in social justice trainings and workshops. And then I do organizing stuff, which feels very aligned to me, but sort of speaks to a different side of my work. I do facilitation for transformative justice processes. I'm like an organizer on some anti-surveillance campaigns and with some people who are also invested in anti-surveillance work. And then I'm currently like doing some really exciting work organizing around a peer respite in Detroit, which is like a house or a place where people can go if they're having a mental health crisis that doesn't involve the hospital or the police. And so feels very true to practicing my abolitionist values and really like thinking of like what are the creative solutions to offer people who are in a crisis that aren't reliant on state systems. And so I try to make all of my work in all of those different ways sort of like line up with my values in both like tearing down systems and building up solutions and other possibilities.
Yeah.
And so I try to every so often take note of where I'm spending a lot of that energy and try to like really balance it out. But yeah, a lot of it has to do with sort of the unique skills that I think I bring to movements into places, which is about the numbers and being able to see through lots of data and lots of information and try to pull out some like insights and some stories to look at and talk about together. So I feel like that's a particularly useful and unique skill that I bring to places. So I try to do that in a lot of different movements and organizations that I'm a part of.
Yeah, that's cool. I never heard you talk about that, taking stock of the balance between what we're tearing down and what we're building. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but yeah, I think that's it's really healthy and important, right? Yeah, for sure. And we know like an abolitionist mindset requires both, right? Like we have to be imaginative and brave in trying new things too. So it's really cool that you're always like sharing with me like the newest, thing that you all are trying out in the community in Detroit. And so I love it.
Yeah. And I think that comes from a place of having lived many years out of that balance. And then I've spent so much energy trying to take systems down, and it's very like disheartening work. And then so much time also thinking about like, what are other solutions that we could be creating, and then getting frustrated when you bump up against the current system. So yeah, it's felt like the only way to like sort of do this work sustainably, at least for me, is to be thinking about that balance and thinking about both of those things at once.
Yeah. Yeah. You seem to be really keyed in, Erin, to what you bring to movements, right? Like that, how you just talked about it, bringing an examination of the numbers and, looking at data and statistics. And for as long as I've known you, and maybe you always seem more sure than than you were, but for as long as I've known you, that, and when you're thinking about how you show up in movement work, you are thinking about that part of who you are, right? I mean, not just data and numbers. Obviously, you're doing a lot of other kind of work, holding space, and obviously being in relationship with people, to me, is all the work, right? But when tasks need to be done, which they do, in organizing work, that you're here for the data, and even the data visualization, which I think is so cool. And we'll have to talk about what that could look like. I struggled with that for a long time, knowing what I can contribute to movements. I always felt like I needed to be doing what I saw other people doing. And I devalued for a long time if I could even identify what I was bringing. I was just like, I'm just being nice to everybody, and I just want everybody to be happy. And that was really I was undervaluing. I wasn't really understanding that that facilitation is a tool, right? And even education, right? Because I identify as like an educator activist, right? And that's what I love doing, and that's what I find myself doing. But oftentimes I wouldn't do it purposely because I didn't see it as a skill for a long time. I do now, but I didn't before. And I share that because I just want to know, like, have you always known what you bring to movements and how to contribute, I talk about zone of genius a lot, right? Gay Hendricks' work, what your zone of genius is and how you can bring that to movements, or how did you come to this?
Yeah. I tell the story about how I was going back to my high school to watch my brother in a play, and I talked to my high school math teacher, and I told her I was taking Calc 3 for fun, and she laughed, and she was like, nobody takes Calc 3 for fun. You like need to be doing something with that. And I genuinely, like went into college and was like, no, I like want to, do social justice stuff, and there's no place for numbers in that. I'll just take math classes for fun. And then I decided to major in math, and really at the Arca Center for Social Justice Leadership was really the first time that like I think you and I started putting together the pieces of like, okay, like you're good at this, like what can we use this for? And I made maps of like our conference participants, and I made maps of our outreach, and I like started looking at our survey data after events. And so I think I slowly like found this sort of like niche of like, oh, there is a place where both of these can intersect. And I think it's been a longer journey to figure out like how can they intersect, not just in organizations that I work for, but in like movement spaces, and figure out like what that really means to like use not just data, but like an analytical mindset in movement spaces. And I think a lot of that has come from having open and honest conversations with other organizers and being like, hey, I like scheduling things on the calendar. I like running the doodle polls. I like keeping track of our tasks. I like organizing the Google Drive. Like, I want to do that stuff. Does that seem helpful? And most of the feedback from people that I've been organizing with is like, yeah, that's extremely helpful. I don't want to do any of that. So hearing that and being like, I'm so in awe of organizers who sort of play a different role of just like visioning, and they like so clearly see the strategy, and they can say really like inspirational things to bring people into movements. And those are all skills that I was jealous of for a long time, that I was like, I don't feel that I have that. Does what I have, is that still meaningful to the movement? And I think only through like transparently talking to other organizers and being like, this is what I have, does that seem helpful at all? And hearing the feedback of, oh my gosh, that's so helpful, because it opens up so much space for people to really like play their role and do what they're good at. And so if I can handle the calendar stuff and making sure we, meet the deadlines and check in on the tasks and be like, hey, how's this going? Like that's stuff that helps other people do the big visioning stuff that I'm all here for. But yeah, my skills really align in like the analytical, critical thinking, sort of organizational stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think being able to see that not only as a contribution, but a valuable contribution, and just as important for movements to grow, to survive and to grow, we need everybody, doing what they do best together. Right. And so that's, yeah, I really appreciate that, because I think, it's unfortunate sometimes we need like external validation and of the fact that what we're doing can be useful. But once we get it, I think for me especially, I've got to like remember it, keep it in my mind, and not constantly feel like, are you sure this is useful, are you sure?
Yeah.
I'm like very not distracted, but like overthinking if things are useful.
Yeah.
Because I think the needs change so quickly, and then of course the threats change shape as well, right? And so I feel like, oh my gosh, the attack is coming from this direction, and I was working over here. How do we pivot? So I think part of it is just like kind of actually constantly checking and knowing ourselves and what those it's not just like individual skills, Erin, it's just like how we move through the world, right? And how we see the world. And like how can we apply that to what's needed now? And that checking in with one another has to be ongoing. And yeah.
And I like what you said about it being purposeful and intentional, because I do feel like I have to work on it. And when I said like, yeah, I have to check in every so often to make sure that like my balance is right and that I'm acting in attention, like those are like conscious decisions that I'm making, and like actual check-ins that I have to sit in and remember to do, so I don't get swept up in, like, oh, this like new thing is happening over here. And so I like got all caught up in a campaign or a movement that really isn't using my skills, or I don't feel very useful for, or, like isn't quite aligned with where I like get the most energy from. And so, yeah, I think it is intentional and purposeful, and it is a practice to like keep doing that and keep thinking about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I was going to ask you about like kind of what keeps you here. Like we talked about what brings you to the work and what keeps you here. And I think we've already started talking about it a bit, just being able to do it in community with others, right? What else keeps you excited about the work that you do for Freedom Lifted and for movements at large?
Yeah. I think what's so exciting about the evaluation piece of it all, about taking lots of data and sort of like coming together with strategies and recommendations and just like insights about the work, is that it feels very like a scaled up version of self-reflection. And I'm very into like that self-reflection about like checking in with myself and trying to be the best version of myself and really reflecting on my experiences. And it feels like a version of that. And so I get a lot of energy from like that value. And I think that the energy I have around that really like keeps me in evaluation work. And I love, like making things understandable for people who look at numbers or a spreadsheet or like lots of survey forms and say, oh my gosh, I have no idea what's going on here. Like to be able to pull things out, even if they're like insights that they disagree with, and they say like, oh, that doesn't sound right. Or like, maybe there's something else going on there. Or like, no, like that person, I don't think that feedback is going to be helpful for us. Like just pulling out something that is useful and usable for people. I think, I guess it's sort of like translation, like that active translation is really valuable to me because I'm giving people like the tools to be able to like do their work in a really cool way. Like I love our conversations about the surveys and evaluations that we get after live sessions, because you have such insights into like what actually happened in the room as a facilitator. And so when I'll pull something out and be like, hey, people thought that this piece was different, or like we heard more feedback about the breakouts than we usually do, like you have thoughts about why that happened, or like the particular dynamics of the organization. And so I think, yeah, I get a lot of energy out of that, the self-reflection piece, and then also like just making things understandable so that we can have those like strategic conversations is really like fulfilling for me. I get lots of energy from that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think our conversations, I always like look forward to the data evaluations meetings with you, or seeing the reports that have come out, because yeah, when you see the numbers or you see the feedback and marry that with what happened from my perspective, it becomes like a bigger truth, right, of what happened in the room. And your work and our work together has helped us really shift, how I approach live facilitation and what I'm paying attention to in order for people to both feel cared for and also challenged. So you briefly mentioned before with the breakout rooms, for example, right? We may get some data where people were feeling like, I don't want to be in a breakout room with my boss. And that wasn't something that we were thinking about, when we first said we would do the sessions for the group, enough to ask in advance, right? But now we always ask in advance. Are there any considerations about who, should be in which rooms together? And check in with your people, organization X, to make sure that we have the best groupings, because randomized is not going to work for everybody, right? And why? And we want people to feel invited and feel psychologically safe, obviously, in our spaces, so that they can be honest and grow, right? So yeah, that's just like one small example of just being able to talk to you about feedback they would give, not to me directly. I would never hear that, but they will give to the organization in general, and just even having systems to be able to gather it, talk through it, make the changes, then see, did that work better, right? It's just so, I love that cycle.
Yeah. I think another place that we do that really well is that question that we ask after the second live session, but before the third live session, about like, what do you want to talk about? Like, what does your organization need to work on? And I think very few forums ask people directly, like, what do you want the content of the next time we come together to be? And I think you do such a great job of going through those answers and really finding the truth of it, and what will be a really productive conversation for people to have, and what needs like deeper probing about, like, okay, why do you want to talk about that? Like, is there a deeper conversation that we need to be having? And I think that's great that we even ask people that at all, because I think it also goes back to, I think as an organization, we really put emphasis on and value the participants of this experience as like experts. Like they're the ones that this is for, like, and they are the ones who can tell us if it was helpful or not. And so it matters what they want to talk about. And I think we take that very seriously, and ask that in such a direct way that I see very few organizations doing, or having those kinds of questions on forums.
Yeah. Thanks. That has been a great question, right? Because we give the agencies and the participants to shape. Well, it's not just it's my responsibility to shape the conversation, but they get to decide what it's going to be about and what it's for, right? And so, and that's what's most important. And it's what distinguishes us too, because I've struggled a lot with this, of feeling like kind of at the edge of the DEI space. I say that a lot, because I kind of reject a lot of the DEI implementation, not the purpose necessarily, but the implementation and the well, that's just a whole nother question, but I do think we're much more talking about what justice looks like, right? Internally and internally at organizations and in the world that we're trying to build. And I think a lot about power, obviously, as well, right? And so what does it mean for us to give the power, right? Or to ensure that participants in our trainings have the power to influence their experience, their learning experience with us. So we're not consultants in this way that we would tell them what to talk about and what to do. But we want to challenge them to do the work of hear the frameworks, right, of justice work. Within this, what are the most important conversations and what are the goals that you all should be having to get to where you can say we're a just organization? We're an organization rooted, right, in social justice and equity. What needs to happen to get you there? Only they can answer that. And there's always that thirst. They want to ask us, right? Tell us. It's like, I don't work there. Well, I'm not going to be there later. You will. So you have to be, the leader of your conversation. And so, yeah, that question really helps share the power with the participants of what the training experience is going to be. And it also helps them actually look forward to the next session because they know it's going to be about something they want to talk about, or there'll be options. So yeah, thank you for recognizing that. And again, just having our relationship really, I think, gives space for us to be able to think in big and important ways around how we can make these trainings matter.
Absolutely.
So are there is there anything else about, what we do with our data you would want people to know, or any best practices you'd want to share with other organizations when they're thinking about how to either strengthen the work they're already doing in data evaluations or even start doing it? What would you tell people?
I think maybe two things that I would want to stress is one, that we're very open to critical feedback. We ask a lot of questions about like, what would you improve? And I think some organizations shy away from that, but that's really like, I think our bread and butter. Like we're really good at taking those things and being like, oh yeah, we're going to incorporate those. And sometimes I think as an organization and as a team of people, we do a good job of like sifting through like what things do we want to change and what things do we not want to change. And so sometimes people say, oh, we want longer breakouts or we want longer sessions. We've gone back and forth about like, you only have so much energy. Do you really want longer sessions? But I think there's other bits of feedback that always get escalated and always get addressed. I know that I always send you accessibility things and those get fixed so that we can always be our most accessible selves. And so I think that like critical feedback and knowing how to work with it and knowing that it is a priority to hear the ways that you can improve. I think Freedom Lifted does a great job with that. And I think that's a best practice for other places. And I think the other thing is that we really like, we collect demographic data in that we ask people, do you identify as BIPOC or do you identify as LGBTQ? And the reason we do that is so that we can break down responses and ratings and see sort of like trends across identities, because those are the communities that we want to be accountable to. And so I think
can you just say that again, the two that we
so
just clearly for people listening, what BIPOC is and what LGBT.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So we ask people if they identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, so BIPOC, or LGBTQIA+, which is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and I is intersex and A is agender. And so all the genders and sexualities. And so we ask people if they identify as part of those communities so that we can break down their ratings and their responses and see if this training and these spaces that we're creating are helpful and useful for those particular communities, because those are the ones we want to be most accountable to. And so I think that's really helpful. I think sometimes people shy away from demographic data or collect it just to collect it and say they've collected it, or collect it just to say like, oh, we trained this many people of this identity. But I think we really break it down and try to get to like, okay, there might be a different experience for someone of a different identity, and let's get to what that is and see if we can sort of use that feedback and that like specific lived experience within our our sessions or within our courses, and use that to make us better. And I think that's something that we've talked a lot about and we worked really hard on. And I think we try to be very clear about participants about why we're asking these sorts of questions. Yeah. And I think, I think it's just we've gotten to a place where I think it's a best practice for other organizations to sort of model after how we ask those questions, but mostly why we ask those questions, that how are we using that data and that information to sort of make us better.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks also, for reminding me of how we discern the data, that we discern some of the feedback that people give us around what can be improved. Yeah, it's not just like what we're hearing, but why we're hearing what we're hearing, thinking about that. And if we can't, or we don't feel like it's wise to change the thing they want to change, because there's something else at the root of it, right? Going back to the example of like, don't put me in a breakout room, with someone that I'm working for. And we can do that, but we also, it's showing us like there's a bigger dynamic we need to pay attention to kind of throughout the session, right? And so it impacts the types of questions we'll ask people to answer and all of it, yeah. So that why are people saying this needs to be improved? And you're right. So the longer sessions, that always comes up, right? We need more time. We need more time. We need more time. But like, no one wants a 3-hour session, or they can't stay the whole time. So we have to figure out how to best use, the time that we have. And then that has really helped us think about having people see the work they do with us as part of larger conversations or an extended conversations that they're having in their organization. So they're not seeing the time with me as the only time that they'll ever have to talk about these things, So just even developing tools for them and documents for them so that they can continue the conversation on their own, which of course that's what we want people to be able to do, period. Not even need us, right, in order to have important and difficult conversations. Yeah, that's what it is, right? It's like they want more time to, not necessarily with us, but to talk about the thing. So how can we create ways for them to do that? Yeah. So yeah, some best practices. Let's go through them again. Best practices for organizations asking, what would you say?
I said sort of welcoming critical feedback. I think we do that really well.
Yeah.
Asking demographic data and using it so that you can get better for particular communities and for the audiences and the communities that you're accountable to. And I think we do a really great job of asking direct questions too. What do you want to see? What would you change? Like, what do you want the next conversation to look like? I guess the underlying theme of that one and all of them really is that you just trust participants that they're the experts on their experience. And so we really value their feedback because they're the ones who know best how it's going.
Yeah. Great. Well, what are you excited? Let's think back, zoom out of Freedom Lift a little bit and just look at the larger field of data and evaluation work. What are you excited about happening right now in the field?
I think I'm most excited about the trajectory that data and evaluations is going on, and mapping too. I include that sort of in my data and evaluation, but there's a particular place in my heart for mapping geographic data. I think we're at this point in time where like data has become so readily available and is just collected sort of like by default. And a lot of the ways that that's served us as a society has been for capitalism and for corporations and for marketing and selling us things. And I think that part of our world has got really good about using data. And I think in the last couple of decades, like the nonprofits and the social justice places and people who are trying to do good and not just like serve capitalism have started to use data in different and unique ways. And so I'm really interested in like, how can we repurpose some of these tools to make them do what we want to for good? So like, for example, you mentioned that like I pay attention to the land of Detroit, and I think it's really interesting and a really like interesting and cool thing to be thinking about how to make decolonial maps, because maps were invented to create borders. They're invented to like claim land. And so what does it mean to like make a map of our area that speaks to like the experience or like the nature or like what people do in our community? Like what does it mean to sort of like fight back against the legacies and the histories of like using these data tools and visualizations for oppression, and what does it mean to like flip them and use them for social justice? And so I think it's really interesting that there's a lot of work going on sort of at the edges of data and evaluation about like, how do we measure equity? Like what does that look like, and how can we do that? Like, and yeah, how do we make maps that speak to community experiences and things that feel true to us, and like what sorts of like stats do we need to create the right strategies for movements? I mean, I think there's just like all sorts of really complex, sticky questions about like, how do we use the tools that we have and the information that we have that were created under capitalism and colonialism, and how do we make them do really good things for social justice movements and organizations?
Yeah. I love that. Repurposing.
Mm-hmm.
It was great talking to you today. Oh, we got a cameo appearance. Yeah, it's great talking to you today about data and evaluations and justice work. I have so much respect for you. I care about you so much. And so I love being in conversation with you all the time. So it was nice to actually, capture a little bit of it for the people who are in the Freedom Lifted family. So thank you so much for your time today, and let's do a part 2 one of these days.
Yeah.
And
And also comment on the video. We love feedback. So let
oh
us know what
yeah,
you think,
please
and
comment
we'll
on the
bring some of
video.
that into the next one. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's really,
go ahead.
well, I'm just so grateful. I mean, it's really great to work with you, and I'm glad that like we've gotten to know each other for such a long time, but then also just that we just find places to work with each other. I mean, I think that's so special, and I'm so grateful for the work that I do at Freedom Lifted.
Oh, well, I mean, you're invaluable to me. And yeah, I've always said, I mean, we've already worked in several other places together. And if, Freedom Lifted is no longer the place where we work, I'll figure out another way. So yeah, it's, all this work is about the people, right? That we get to do it with. So I feel very fortunate to be able to build just worlds with you.